A voice from Sainte-Hélène. Placed by peculiar circumstances arising from my profession about the person of the most extraordinary man, perhaps of any age, in the most critical juncture of his life, I determined to profit by the opportunities afforded me as far as I could consistently with honor. The following volumes are the result. The reader will see in the very outset of the work how it was that I became attached as a medical officer to the household of Napoleon. That it was in consequence of his own application, by the advice of my superiors, and with the full concurrence of the Lords of the Admiralty. I never sought the situation. It was in some degree assigned me, and most assuredly I should have shrunk from the acceptance of it had I contemplated the possibility of being even remotely called on to compromise the principles either of an officer or a gentleman. Before, however, I had been long scorched upon the rock of Sainte-Hélène, I was taught to appreciate the embarrassment of my situation. I saw soon that I must either become accessory to vexations for which there was no necessity, or incur suspicions of no very comfortable nature. Fortunately for my honor, my happiness, and indeed for everything except my interests, I did not hesitate. Humanity required of me a consideration for my patient. The uniform I wore imperiously commanded that I should not soil it by indignities to a captive, and my country's character pledged to me to hold sacred the misfortune of the fallen. This I did. It is my pride to avow it, a pride inferior only to that which I feel in finding those men, my enemies, who consider it a crime. The few alleviations which I had it in my power to offer, Napoleon repaid by the condescension with which he honored me, and my necessary professional intercourse was soon increased into an intimacy, if I may speak of intimacy with such a personage. In fact, in the seclusion of Longwood, he soon almost entirely laid aside the emperor with those about him. He conversed familiarly on his past life, and sketched the characters, and detailed the anecdotes, which are here presented faithfully to the reader. The unreserved manner in which he spoke of everything can only be conceived by those who heard him, and though where his own conduct was questioned, he had a natural human leaning towards himself, still truth appeared to be his principal, if not his only object. In the delineation of character, he was peculiarly felicitous. His mind seemed to concentrate its beams on the object he wished to elucidate, and its prominent features became instantly discernible. The intimate acquaintance which he necessarily possessed with all the great characters who figured in Europe for the last 30 years gave to his opinions and observations more than ordinary interest. Indeed, from no other source could such authentic information be acquired, notwithstanding the interval which elapsed since many of the occurrences alluded to took place, and the distracting occupations which must have employed his mind. It was wonderful to see how freshly he remembered every transaction which became the subject of inquiry. If there was anything more extraordinary than this, it was the apathy with which he perused the libels which were written on him. He seemed inspired with a conviction of posthumous fame beyond the reach of contemporary depreciation, but perhaps the knowledge of the man may be better acquired from seeing him as he really was during the first 3 years of his residence at Sainte-Hélène than from any speculative deduction as he appeared, spoke, acted, and seemed to feel. The reader shall have him. It may perhaps be only right to add that some of the observations or arguments on particular subjects were committed to paper from Napoleon's own dictation. Before, however, we go further, I feel that the public have a right to demand how far they can depend on the authenticity of these volumes. To the friends who know me, I hope no verification is necessary. To my detractors, even mathematical proof would be unavailing. To those who are prejudiced, neither on one side nor the other, the following corroborations are submitted. In the first place, then I refer to the facsimile of Napoleon's handwriting prefixed to the frontispiece and given to me by himself as a proof of the confidence with which he treated me. The original of this, any persons who chooses to apply to me shall see. I refer also to the whole Longwood household, and more particularly to the executors, Counts Bertrand and Montauban, and to countless causes as to the facilities I had and the familiarity with which I was honored. Thus, I hope will be sufficient on the score of opportunity. The next point is as to the accuracy of the transcript. Upon this subject, my plan was as follows. I spoke as little and listened as attentively as I could, seldom interposing except for the purpose of leading to those facts on which I wished for information. To my memory, though, naturally retentive, I did not entirely trust. Immediately on retiring from Napoleon's presence, I hurried to my chamber and carefully committed to paper the topics of conversation with, so far as I could, the exact words used. Where I had the least doubt as to my accuracy, I marked it in my journal, and by a subsequent recurrence to the topic when future opportunities offered, I satisfied myself. This, although I have avoided them as much as possible, may account for some occasional repetitions, but I have thought it better to appear sometimes tedious than ever to run the risk of a misstatement. My long residence at Longwood rendered those opportunities frequent, and the facility of communication with Napoleon made the introduction of almost any subject easy. Thus did I form my original journal. As it increased in interest, it became, of course, to me an object of increased solicitude, and as nothing which could possibly occur at Sainte-Hélène would have surprised me, I determined to place its contents at least beyond the power of that spoliation which afterwards was perpetuated on some of my other property. Having purchased in the island a machine for that purpose, I transmitted at intervals the portions copied to a friend on board of one of His Majesty's ships in the roads, who forwarded them as opportunities occurred to Mr. Holmes of Lyon's Inn, Napoleon's respectable agent in London. The entire of this copy Mr. Holmes duly received some time previous to my return to England, as appears below by his own authentication, and part of the silver paper manuscript as he received it I have deposited with my publisher for the satisfaction of the skeptical. Thus, for the authenticity of the following conversations, the reader has the guarantees, first, of the undoubted opportunities afforded me, secondly, of their having been taken on the spot, and thirdly, of their having been transmitted at the moment, and fourthly, of the original document itself, authenticated by the persons to whom it had been consigned and now submitted to general inspection. Independent of these, I think I may refer with confidence to those third persons whose interviews with Napoleon are occasionally introduced, and some of the official members of His Majesty's government cannot with truth deny that many of the political conversations were by me communicated at no great interval after their occurrence. Such communication I considered it my duty to make wherever I thought their import might benefit the country. What use ministers may have made of them, I know not, but certainly the preventative system with respect to smugglers was adopted soon after the transmission of Napoleon's conversation on the subject. Perhaps, however, after all, the best proof of the authenticity of these volumes will be found in their own contents, independent of the internal evidence contained in their anecdotes themselves. There was, on whatever came from Napoleon's mind, an inimitable impress on this subject. If I appear to many unnecessarily minute, it is because I am well aware that every attempt will be made to deny the authenticity of these conversations. There are too many implicated, too many interested, too many who must wish to cast an impenetrable shade over the transactions of Sainte-Hélène to suffer the truth to obtain an undisputed circulation. The following official letters will show that it was at least the desire of His Majesty's ministers to bury Napoleon's mind with his body in the grave of his imprisonment. If I have disobeyed the injunction, it is because I thought that every fragment of such a mind should be preserved to history, because I despise the despotism which would incarcerate even intellect, and because I thought those only should become subsidiary to concealment who were conscious of actions which could not bear the light. The following creditable documents emanating from the ministers of a free country were transmitted by authority to me at Sainte-Hélène soon after the publication of Mr. Warden's book. Every feeling heart will make its own comment on them. His Majesty's ship Conqueror, Sainte-Hélène Road, 2nd January 1818. Sir, I herewith enclose to you a copy of a letter I've just received from Mr. Secretary Barrow relative to the work published by Mr. Warden, late surgeon of His Majesty's ship Northumberland, which I desire you will pay most particular attention to. I am, sir, your most obedient servant, humble servant, Robert Plampin. To Mr. Barry O'Meara, Surgeon, Longwood, Sainte-Hélène, Admiralty Office, 13th September 1817. Sir, my lords commissioners of the Admiralty, having had under their consideration a work which has been published by Mr. Warden, late surgeon of His Majesty's ship Northumberland, their lordships have commanded me to signify the directions to you to acquaint all the officers employed under your orders that they are to understand that if they should presume to publish any information which they may have obtained by being officially employed at Sainte-Hélène, they will suffer their lordships heavy displeasure. I am, sir, your most obedient servant, John Barrow. Such were the attempts, certainly not unaccountable, to cancel all recollections of Napoleon, at least in his captivity. Those who issued these orders forgot that the power did not accompany the will to subject the publications of Englishmen to an imprimatur, despising the denunciation as I did and from my heart. I have, however, thought it only my duty not to publish these conversations till after Napoleon's death. Nor have I done so even now, without the knowledge of his executors. All danger from them is past. The tongue which uttered them is silent forever, and history has a right to them. If I was disposed to comment on these letters, I should say that they proceed altogether upon a wrong assumption, namely, that an official footing at Longwood gave to anyone the power of obtaining the information which I collected. Nothing can be more absurd. If I had acted a different part from what I did, if in place of reconciling the allegiance of a subject with the compassion of a Christian and preserving the rights of my country, while I took care not to compromise the feelings of my nature, I tried to make my office the avenue to fortune, if I sunk the man in the menial, if I became an official slave instead of an honest servant, if I courted power by straining my loyalty to suit the purposes of mean vexation and unmanly vengeance, if I lifted up my hoof against the dead lion, or displayed my pygmy prowess by a dastard warfare upon the helpless infirmities of a fallen enemy, I should not only have had no opportunities of access, but I should have been prescribed Napoleon's and man's society. But I acted altogether upon different principles, after having devoted the best 15 years of my life to combating his soldiers in the field and on the wave. I forgot, when he was my country's prisoner, that he had ever been my country's foe. I thought the conquest of clemency superior even to that of valor, and that a proud country should make her enemies confess not only that she conquered, but that she deserved to conquer. In such a place as Sainte-Hélène, there could have been no danger from the worst man's deviating into feelings of humanity, fenced round as it is with the most frightful precipices with only one practicable place of egress, and that one not only bristling with cannon and crowded with guards, but effectually barricaded by our squadron. Escape could scarcely have been effected by a miracle. The simple precaution which Napoleon himself suggested of never suffering any ship to sail until his actual safety should be ascertained might have obviated the necessity of almost any other. Having said thus much upon the motives by which my conduct has been actuated, I have only to add that although I shall contemptuously pass by in anonymous insinuations, I am ready to meet any charge before any tribunal whatsoever where the truth can be investigated. Let me only have an opportunity of proof and a responsible accuser in the face of the world. I challenge investigation. With respect to the mandate issued by the Admiralty against publication, it is suited to the meridian rather of Algiers than England. The very attempt in a free country need only be mentioned to be reprobated. It must have proved as abortive as it was despotic, for if it were any Englishman base enough to obey it, the Frenchman need not, so that it was at best but a bungling refinement on the revolutionary device said to have been proposed of burning the books in Paris to annihilate learning as if no other copies existed in the world. With this remark, however, I shall dismiss the subject, as it is difficult to say whether the credit of the measure is due to the present literary board or to those lay philosophers whose future censorship has been since cruelly dispensed with by the House of Commons. With respect to the views of men and things taken by Napoleon in his remarks, I beg to guard myself against any adoption of them as my own. I am merely the narrator. I give them as the substance of his interesting and unreserved conversations, neither vouching for the critical exactness of his dates, nor the justness of his opinions, nor indeed for anything but the accuracy of my report. I only engage to the reader to lay before him Napoleon's sentiments as that extraordinary man uttered them, warm from the heart and faithful to its fires. In making this remark, however, I am bound to add that I neither avoid nor evade inquiry in any investigation in which the truth can be told. I am perfectly willing to take my share, ready to abide the event, whether it bring reward or responsibility. In consequence of the resolution which had been adopted by the British government to send the former sovereign of France to a distant settlement and communicated to him by Major General Sir Henry Bunbury, Under Secretary of State, on board of the Bellerophon 74, Captain Maitland at Plymouth a few days before Napoleon, accompanied by such of his suite as were permitted by our government, was removed on the 4th of August, 1815. From the Bellerophon to the Northumberland 74, Captain Ross. The vessel bore the flag of Rear Admiral Sir George Cockburn, G.C.B., who was entrusted with the charge of conveying Napoleon to Sainte-Hélène and of regulating all measures necessary to the security of his personal detention after his arrival at the place of his confinement. Out of the suite that had followed his fortunes on board of the Bellerophon and the Myrmidon, His Majesty's government permitted 4 of his officers, his surgeon, and 12 of his household to share his exile. The undermentioned persons were consequently selected and accompanied him on board of the Northumberland: Counts Bertrand, Monttalon, and Las Casas, Baron Gorgot, Countess Bertrand and her 3 children, Countess Monttalon and child, Marchand, Premier Valet de Chambre, Cipriani, Maitre d'Hotel, Piron, Saint-Denis, Novarez, Lepage, Choux, Archambault, Santini, Rousseau, Chantilly, Josephine, Bernard, and his wife, domestics to Count Bertrand, a fine youth of about 14, son to Count Las Casas, was also permitted to accompany his father. Previous to their removal from the Bellerophon, the swords and other arms of the prisoners were demanded from them, and their luggage subsequently examined in order that possession might be taken of any property found, whether in bills, money, or jewels. After paying those of his suite who were not permitted to accompany him, only 4,000 Napoleons in gold were found, which were taken possession of by persons authorized to that effect by His Majesty's government. When the determination of the British ministers to send Napoleon to Sainte-Hélène was communicated to his suite, Monsieur Mingo, the surgeon who had accompanied him from Rochefort, refused to follow him to the tropics. Monsieur Mingo was a young man unknown to Napoleon and had been fortuitously chosen to attend him until Monsieur Fourreau de Beauregard, who had been his surgeon in Elba, could join him, and I was informed that even had he been willing to proceed to Sainte-Hélène, his services would not have been accepted. On the day that Napoleon first came on board the Bellerophon, after he had gone round the ship, he addressed me on the poop and asked if I were de chirurgien major. I replied in the affirmative in the Italian language. I replied in the affirmative and in the same language what country I was a native of. I replied of Ireland. Where did you study your profession? In Dublin and London. Which of the two is the best school of physic? I replied that I thought Dublin the best school of anatomy and London of surgery. Oh, said he, smiling, you say Dublin is the best school of anatomy because you are an Irishman. I answered that I begged pardon, and that I had said so because it was true. As in Dublin, the subjects for dissection were to be procured at a fourth of the price paid in London, and the professors were equally good. He smiled at this reply and asked what actions I had been in and what parts of the globe I had served. I mentioned several, and amongst others, Egypt. At the word Egypt, he commenced a series of questions which I answered to the best of my ability. I mentioned to him that the corps of officers to which I then belonged messed in a house which had formerly served as a stable for his horses. He laughed at this, and ever afterwards noticed me when walking on deck, and occasionally called me to interpret or explain. On the passage from Rochefort to Torbay, Colonel Plenat, one of his orderly officers, was taken very ill and attended by me. As Monsieur Mangot was incapable, through seasickness, of offering any assistance during the period of his illness, Napoleon frequently asked about him and conversed with me on the nature of his malady and the mode of cure practiced. After arrival at Plymouth, General Gourgaud also was very unwell and did me the honor to have recourse to me for advice. All those circumstances had the effect of bringing me more in contact with Napoleon than any other officer in the ship, with the exception of Captain Maitland. And the day before the Bellerophon left Torbay, the Duke of Rovigo, with whom I was frequently in the habit of conversing, asked me if I were willing to accompany Napoleon to Sainte-Hélène as surgeon, adding that if I were, I should receive a communication to that effect from Count Bertrand, the Grand Marshal. I replied that I had no objection, provided the British government and my captain were willing to permit me, and also under certain stipulations. I communicated this immediately to Captain Maitland, who was good enough to favor me with his advice and opinion, which were that I ought to accept the offer provided the sanction of Admiral Lord Keith and of the English government could be obtained, adding that he would mention the matter to his lordship. On our arrival at Torbay, Count Bertrand made the proposal to Captain Maitland and to myself, which was immediately communicated to Lord Keith. His lordship sent for me on board of the Tonnant, and after some preliminary conversation in which I explained the nature of the stipulations I was desirous of making, did me the honor to recommend me in strong terms to accept of the situation, adding that he could not order me to do so, as it was foreign to the naval service, and a business altogether extraordinary, but that he advised me to accept of it and expressed his conviction that government would feel obliged to me, as they were very anxious that Napoleon should be accompanied by a surgeon of his own choice. His lordship added that it was an employment which I could hold perfectly consistent with my honor and with the duty I owed to my country and my sovereign, feeling highly gratified that the step which I had in contemplation had met with the approbation of characters so distinguished in the service as Admiral Lord Keith and Captain Maitland. I accepted the situation and proceeded on board the Northumberland, stipulating, however, by letter to his lordship that I should always be considered as a British officer and upon the list of naval surgeons on full pay, paid by the British government, and that I should be at liberty to quit so peculiar a service should I find it not to be consonant with my wishes. During the voyage, which lasted about 10 weeks, Napoleon did not suffer much from seasickness. After the first week, he rarely made his appearance on deck until after dinner. He breakfasted in his own cabin a la fourchette at 10 or 11 o'clock and spent a considerable portion of the day in writing and reading. Before he sat down to dinner, he generally played a game at chess and remained at that meal in compliment to the admiral about an hour, at which time coffee was brought to him, and he left the company to take a walk upon the deck, accompanied by Counts Bertrand and Las Casas, while the admiral and the rest continued at table for an hour or two longer. While walking the quarter deck, he frequently spoke to such of the officers as could understand and converse with him, and often asked Mr. Warden, the surgeon of the Northumberland, questions touching the prevailing complaints, the mode of treatment of the sick. He occasionally played a game at whist, but generally retired to his cabin at 9 or 10 o'clock. Such was the uniform course of his life during the voyage. The Northumberland was two off Funchal, and Helena frigate was sent in to procure refreshments. During the time we were off the anchorage, a violent Sirocco Levant prevailed, which did great mischief to the grapes. We were informed that some of the ignorant and superstitious inhabitants attributed to the presence of Napoleon 14 or 1500 volumes of books were ordered from England for Napoleon's use by Count Bertrand. We arrived at Sainte-Hélène on the 15th of October. Nothing can be more desolate or repulsive than the appearance of the exterior of the island. When we had anchored, it was expected that Napoleon would have been invited to stop at Plantation House, the country seat of the governor, until a house could have been got ready for him. As heretofore, passengers of distinction had invariably been asked to pass the time they remained on the island there. Some forcible reason possibly existed, as his courtesy was not extended to him. On the evening of the 17th, about 7 o'clock, Napoleon landed at Jamestown, accompanied by the admiral, Count and Countess Bertrand, Las Casas, Count and Countess Montauban, and proceeded to a house belonging to a gentleman named Porteous, which had been taken for that purpose by the admiral and was one of the best in town. It was not, however, free from inconvenience, as Napoleon could not make his appearance at the windows or even descend from his bedchamber without being exposed to the rude and ardent gaze of those who wished to gratify their curiosity with a sight of the imperial captive. There was no house in the town at all calculated for privacy except the governor's, to which there belonged a court, and in front there was a walk upon the ramparts facing the sea and overlooking the Merino, which proximity to the ocean probably was the cause of its not having been selected for him. The inhabitants of the island were in very anxious expectation during the greatest part of the day to obtain a sight of the exiled ruler when he should make his entree to the place of his confinement. Numbers of persons of every description crowded the merino, the street, and the houses by which he was to pass in the eager hope of catching a glimpse of him. The expectations of most of them were, however, disappointed, as he did not land until after sunset, at which time the majority of the islanders, tired of waiting and supposing that his landing was deferred until the following morning, had retired to their homes. It was also at this time nearly impossible to recognize his person. Counts Bertrand and Montholon, with their ladies, Count Lescazes and his son, General Gourgaud, and myself, were also accommodated in Mr. Porteus's house. At a very early hour on the morning of the 18th, Napoleon, accompanied by the Admiral and Lescazes, proceeded up to Longwood, a country seat of the Lieutenant Governor's, which he was informed was the spot that was deemed the most proper for his future residence. He was mounted on the spirited little black horse, which was lent for the occasion by the Governor, Colonel Wilkes. On his way up, he observed a neat little spot called the Briars, situated about 200 yards from the road, belonging to a gentleman named Balcombe, who, he was informed, was to be his purveyor, and appeared pleased with its romantic situation. Longwood is situated on a plain formed on the summit of a mountain about 1,800 feet above the level of the sea, and including Deadwood, comprises 1,400 or 1,500 acres of land, a great part of which is planted with an indigenous tree called gumwood. Its appearance is somber and unpromising. Napoleon, however, said that he would be more contented to fix his residence there than to remain in the town as a mark for the prying curiosity of important spectators. Unfortunately, the house only consisted of 5 rooms on a ground floor, which had been built one after the other according to the wants of the family and without any regard to either order or convenience, and were totally inadequate for the accommodation of himself and his suite. Several additions were consequently necessary, which it was evident could not be accomplished for some weeks, even under the superintendence of so active an officer as Sir George Cockburn. Upon his return from Longwood, Napoleon proceeded to the Briars and intimated to Sir George that he would prefer remaining there until the necessary additions were made to Longwood, to returning to town, provided the proprietor's consent could be obtained. This request was immediately granted. The Briars is the name of an estate romantically situated about 1.5 miles from Jamestown, comprising a few acres of highly cultivated land, excellent fruit, and kitchen gardens, plentifully supplied with water, adorned with many delightful shady walks, and long celebrated for the genuine old English hospitality of the proprietor, Mr. Balcombe. About 20 yards from the dwelling house stood a little pavilion consisting of 1 good room on the ground floor and 2 garrets, which Napoleon, not willing to cause any inconvenience to the family of his house, selected for his abode. In the lower room his camp bed was put up, and in this room he ate, slept, read, and dictated a portion of his eventful life. Lescazes and his son were accommodated in one of the garrets above, and Napoleon's premier valet de chambre and others of his household slept in the other, and upon the floor in the little hall opposite the entrance of the lower room. At first his dinner was sent ready, cooked from the town, but afterwards Mr. Balcombe found a means to get a kitchen fitted up for his use. The accommodations were so insufficient that Napoleon frequently walked out after he had finished his dinner in order to allow his domestics an opportunity of eating theirs in the room which he had just quitted.